Ghana's parliament has voted to pass a controversial bill to severely restrict LGBTQ rights in a move that has been condemned by rights activists. A coalition of religious and traditional leaders sponsored the legislation that is favored by most lawmakers and that passed in parliament yesterday. The bill would punish those who take part in LGBTQ sexual acts, as well as those who promote the rights of gay, lesbian, or other non-conventional sexual gender, or you could say identities, with time in prison.
The bill, one of the harshest of its kind in Africa, some have said, still has to be validated by the president before entering into law, which observers believe is unlikely before a general election in December. Activist groups have called the Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill a setback for human rights and urged President Nana Akufo-Addo's government to reject it. This morning, we'll bring in our guest, political editor Wilberforce Asare, who will be joining us from Accra, Ghana, to discuss the details of this bill and its reception, I beg your pardon, in Ghana. Good morning, Mr. Asare. Thank you very much for joining us. It's good to see you after a long while.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year as well. Let's talk about this bill that has garnered a lot of reaction. It's of course waiting the president's assent. But talk to us about this bill. We hear that this bill began in 2021. Lead us through the journey of the bill up until now.
Indeed. So some 8 members of parliament in our country, 7 of them from the minority side and 1 from the majority side, proposed this bill, which initially was called Promotion of Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill 2021. Now, the bill was first presented in January 2021. And so if you do the simple mathematics, you would notice that this bill has been in Parliament for 3 years. 3 years because of the ups and downs that were associated with getting the bill passed, the amendments that were proposed, civil society interest and pressure group interest. Pressure group, when I say pressure group, I mean those who were for and those who were against the bill. So it's gone through a lot of processes before it has gotten to where it is today. Essentially, this whole bill was thought about because of the phenomenon of LGBTQ plus. And we do know that LGBT represents lesbians, gays, homosexuals, and what have you. And traditionally in our country, we frown upon those things, both the Muslim side of things in our country, the Christian side of things, and then the traditional side of things. And so people say that already the issues of gay, lesbianism, and all that has no place in Ghana. And so there was no need for another legislation, giving it the prominence that it has been given by our members of parliament. But it is what it is now because the bill has been passed, and even though it is not law yet because the president has to assent to it, it is being passed. And people say that there's going to be a lot of political pressure on the president to get that bill signed. Again, another part of things is that some pressure groups who are against the bill are lazing their boots to go to the Supreme Court and to ask for a constitutional interpretation because they want to say that their fundamental human rights has been breached by the introduction of that law in Parliament. So interesting times ahead of this particular bill that has been passed by our Parliament just yesterday.
That's very interesting. But then again, we did have some Ghanaians who did not want this bill to be passed. And then there were stories of a few organizations from the West that were trickling into the country to, in a way, either support the bill and while some were against it. Can you please share with us what the current situation is, especially with a cross-section of Ghanaians? How are they taking this bill? Is it a case of jubilation and saying, finally, it has happened? Or is it a case of, mixed reactions, not too certain, maybe we should just lie low a bit and give it some time?
Well, so it's actually a mixed reaction, I can tell you. And that is because Ghana is a very religious country, as you well know, just like Nigeria. We have the Christian majority and we have the Muslim minority. And then we also have the other minority, which is the traditional worshippers group. So those three groups are the predominant three basic religions in our country. All the three levels are not in favor of the promotion of LGBTQ in the country. So that should tell you that the issue or the phenomenon of LGBTQ is not something that will gain currency in the country. However, there are well-meaning people, human rights lawyers, practitioners, people who are informed about the new rights that are rising up across the length and breadth of the world. And those people have been advocating that while they agree that our very system does not accept or condone issues of LGBT, blah, 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 they are saying that because of the phenomenon of rights in the global space, you cannot be seen legislating against things that people want to do by virtue of an agreement between the two of them or the three of them or whatever it is. And so these rights, these promoters of rights, the human rights activists, the legal practitioners, the persons in the academia have all risen. I can mention some very important names in our country who rose up against this particular bill and its passage in the country. For example, there's Professor Audrey Gajipo at the University of Ghana, and she is on record to have said, she's a very prominent woman in Ghana, and she's on record to have said that the president should reject the signing of this particular bill. He has actually asked Parliament not to go ahead to pass the bill and what have you. So it's been misreaction, even though the religious sects in our country approve of the passage. There are another group of people who are from the academia, who are lawyers, who are human rights practitioners, who are against the legislation that is being introduced by Parliament. Essentially, the legislation, if you look at it critically, is criminalizing LGBT to the point that you can go to jail if you are found as a lesbian or gay or homosexual. And again, even journalists who are seen writing stories or putting up stories that seek to promote LGBT could also end up being prosecuted and going to jail. And some have said that that aspect of things is actually a breach on press freedom and what have you. So it's complicated, and we see that with the coming into force of this law, there are a group of people who will head straight to the country's Supreme Court to challenge the constitutionality of the law if it comes into force.
Well, of course, it's important that we mention, now that you've talked about the fact that they could potentially end up in prison. Reports have it here that the punishment for individuals caught in same sexual activity would range between 6 months to 3 years, while those who support or promote the activity may be sentenced to 3 or 5 years in prison. Let's talk about another angle of the bill that sort of some people who have spoken in favor of the bill say that this is not similar to what the other African countries that have promoted anti-LGBT laws, have. And that is, of course, I think we hear that there's a provision, and I'll need you to sort of help us clarify with that, a provision that allows people who have been caught or people who have been brought before a court to recant their LGBT position and then get some form of medical treatment that the Western world have referred to as torture. I don't know if you can sort of shed some light on that area for us.
So yes, indeed, the bill, as we have it here in our country, has about 38 sections, and there are multiple sections, as I've just mentioned, as far as this bill is concerned. So apart from the duty to promote proper human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values, There are provisions like prohibition against undermining proper human sexual rights and Ghanaian family values. There is the duty to report. There is the prohibition of LGBTQQ, IAAP plus and related activities. Several provisions in this bill, in this particular bill that has been passed. So things like keeping a brothel for the prohibited sexual activity, prohibition of gross indecency, void marriage, so many provisions. But for the question that you asked, the challenge that has come up is that the bill is trying to say that we frown upon anybody being engaged in LGBTQ, and that if we find you, we will prosecute you and put you in jail. But in the same breath, the bill is trying to make provision, particularly for child victims who may find themselves being abused by certain persons as far as their sexual rights are concerned. It's making provision for them to be taken care of by the state and for the state to incur cost on their maintenance and their well-being. In fact, that is one of the places of departure as far as this bill is concerned, because people say that there is a claim, and not just a claim, perhaps. There is the provisions in our law that says that if private members of parliament are bringing a bill that imposes cost on the state, there is a need for some extra work to be done and some extra agreements, because you cannot on your own just wake up and then impose cost on the state. It must go through the proper channels. And so those provisions in the bill have been challenged in certain quarters that it did not go through the right process, because if the bill comes into force, it will impose cost on the state, and that cost must be borne by the taxpayer. And there are laid down processes in our constitution before those kind of laws are activated. And so, yes, it is there that people who are abused or find themselves abused by other persons in some of these circumstances should be taken care of. But even those provisions are being challenged by persons who are associated with the law in our country. So indeed, yes, it is true, it is provided for, but there is a challenge about it. And it's one of the reasons why some people are saying the president should not assent to the law, the bill, because if he assents to the bill, there will be an imposition of cost on the state, which has not been budgeted for.
Okay, so I believe that the phrase I was trying to remember when I was asking that question was conversion therapy. And I know that the bill, there's provision for conversion of therapy, which I wanted you to help us clarify. But I'll come back to conversion therapy. Let's quickly talk about what the implication of this might mean for Ghana if the president signs this into law. And we'll still come back to the possibility of the president signing into law, because he has openly spoken about this. But how do you foresee that the West will react to this? Do you fear, or does Ghana fear that it will affect that there'll be clampdown, there'll be pushback from the West that might affect trade and businesses being done in Ghana?
Well, so even before the bill was passed by Parliament, we have had reactions coming from our international partners. And those reactions have been obviously push against the legislation of this anti-gay issues in our country. So already the West has demonstrated that they are not in favor of the passage of this human sexual rights bill that was before Parliament, which now has been passed by the House. You remember that in Uganda, there is something similar that took place, and you saw the reaction of the West. They have refused to support Uganda with the aid packages. They have refused to do so many things that they were doing for Uganda just because of that bill or that law that came into force in Uganda. And so it is one of the things that certain persons in government who are associated with policy and international arrangements have frowned upon. That why go the route if you do this, and you would have it will have an impact on your relationship with your foreign partners and all that. It could affect the inflow of support and all the very much needed help that we get from our international partners and international donors. So it is a concern that has been raised in our country. It's been raised in various quarters. Some say that the minority side of things were pushing this because they want to just embarrass the current government. Again, this year is an election year in Ghana. And so they believe that any opposition from the government as far as the passage of this LGBT quote-unquote bill is concerned will inure to their benefit as the opposition ahead of the elections in 2024 December. So really, there are the concerns that have been raised about this. The international partners have already raised concerns, and now that the bill has been passed, even though it is not law yet, I believe they will be standing on the fence to see whether President Akufo-Addo will sign it into law, because that is when the bill actually materializes, and that is when the international partners can have something to rely on to, as it were, push back on the support that they give to Ghana, because now it would have become law. So yes, the international partners have already expressed their opinion. They are waiting to see whether the president will give the final okay to this bill, and that is when their concerns perhaps will be much more activated. Again, Ghana is signatory to the United Nations, and so the United Nations as an institution largely supports the rights of persons who claim to be LGBTQ and all that. And so it is dicey for the country. Policymakers have not been happy about the approach, but it looks like the political undertones in this passage of this bill inure to the benefit of the opposition. And that is the reason why 7 out of the promoters of the bill were from the minority side of things in our parliament, and just one from the majority, who incidentally happens to be a minister, a deputy minister in our country. Is actually the deputy minister responsible for education. So yes, that's the situation. That's where we find ourselves as a country.
Quite alarming that 7, and of course only one from the majority. But my final question, or our final question to you would be this. I mean, you are part and parcel of the media. What steps would the media take now, knowing that this law is nearing it's nearing to be signed by the president? As a media person, what do you think the media executives would have to put in place? Because also the media is involved in any way of, if you engage in promoting, in doing that. We do recall something similar happened sometime. I think one of the stations, Joy FM or so, that gave room to one of the LGBTQ reps who spoke for a long time, and then they got called out by someone from the parliament who did give warnings to them. But now that the law is nearing its time to be signed by the president, what do you think media executives will have to do? I mean, you're one of them, so you don't get sanctioned. I would like to hear from you on that.
Well, indeed, my good friend, the media is going to have to be very circumspect. Previously, we've had some media houses bring persons who identify as gay, as lesbian, onto their television sets and radio stations.
Yeah, the popular one, you are
interviewed.
Gay.
Yes, again.
Sorry, I had to cut it. I just remember the popular one. The guy that said you are gay.
No, the guy that said, "Why are you gay?" But I don't think that was Ghana.
Was that?
I don't think
that's Uganda. Okay, all right, that's fine.
That was Uganda.
Right. The
yes.
The one. Oh, so, yeah, that's the radio one. I remember the other one.
Yes. So we have had those occasions where we have brought those people to our radio stations and television stations and have interviewed them. But if this bill is finally signed into law by the president, media practitioners cannot, as a matter of fact, bring people who identify as gay and lesbian and interview them freely on their radio and television stations and ask them to tell us why they are gay and why they are lesbian and all that. It will be seen as promoting gayism and lesbianism and what have you. And the law or the bill, as has been passed now, frowns upon those things. And so, indeed, members of the media are going to tread out of the abundance of caution when it comes to discussing issues to do with LGBT going forward. That is the honest truth. If you ask me, there is nothing more, there is nothing less. Because if this law comes into force, the law is actually saying that media persons cannot be seen promoting issues to do with gayism and lesbianism. So what can we do?
Well, I guess we're just going to have to wait. So I have a twofold question as we wrap up. And the first would be, is it safe to say that that law is as good as passed if it comes in the time of Nana Akufo-Addo? Because we've seen videos of him clearly saying that so long as he's in office, it is not in his time that the LGBTQ laws will be promoted, right? That LGBTQ will not thrive in his time. I don't want to misquote him, but something within those lines. So is it safe to say that we're certain that if he gets to his desk whilst he's still in office before the elections, it will be passed? That's one. And two, are there also fears that this law might be interpreted in such a way as to endanger the lives of those who are actually LGBTQ in Ghana? Because we've seen in several parts of the continent where a lot of them have been treated with such hostility in the ways that their lives are being targeted, they're being killed. Are there fears that this might also happen in Ghana?
Well, yes, so you see, what the president is on record to have said is that it is not in his time as president that gay, lesbian, and all those rights will be legalized. So the president's claim has been that he says it will not be legalized while he is president. Now, this bill that has been passed by Parliament is not, what it does that is seeking to disband LGBT activities. So, there are two things.
Right.
You can go to Parliament and pass a law to legalize it, and you can go to Parliament to pass a law to criminalize it. What has happened is that we've passed a bill that is criminalizing LGBTQ activities. But the president was back then saying that it is not in his time that LGBT will be legalized. And that is what the president is on record to have said. Indeed, it has not been legalized in the country. The bill that has been passed now by Parliament is only saying that we will criminalize your activity if we find that you are involved in issues to do with LGBT. But really, as I proceed to perhaps wrap up this, let me just read this for you. Section 13(1) of the bill. It says that a person who, through media, technological platform, technological account, or any other means produces, procures, markets, broadcasts, disseminates, publishes, or distributes, or B, uses an electronic device, the internet service, a film, or any other device capable of electronic storage or transmission to produce, procure, market, broadcast, disseminate, publish, or distribute a material or information directed at a child, whether directly or indirectly, with intent to C, invoke the interest of the child in any activity prohibited under this act, or B or D, teach the child to explore any gender or sexual or sex other than the binary category of male and female, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a term of imprisonment not less than 6 months and not more than 10 years. So this is just one of the provisions in the act, and it tells you the broad nature of the prohibition, using internet, using this, using that, literally telling us that we don't want you to even mention the word LGBTQ in Ghana. That is quite serious, if you ask me.
It is. I mean, I do recall at some point you did have Ignatius Anno, who's also in the media, who came out to say he's gay and all. But then again, I think we've covered this conversation in all aspects, looking at what will come out of it. But let's wait to see if President Nana Akufo-Addo will indeed put his pen to paper, and then we can come back to look at the implications, because obviously after he's signed, we're certain that there would be a broadcast and more explanation on what Ghanaians should expect. And how Ghanaians exactly will interpret this law. Because, I mean, the second part of the question, which I'm not sure we have time now for, is if this will endanger the lives of the LGBTQ people living in Ghana, if it's likely to.
endanger their lives?
Briefly, I think that there is a likelihood of some kind of danger to persons who will go ahead to identify as LGBTQ. I perceive that there will be some danger, and their own rights must then be protected, because you don't have the right to attack me just because I say I am something that you don't like. So it is a reality which the authorities are going to have to deal with.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, political editor Wilberforce Asare, joining us all the way from Ghana. Hopefully, we would touch down Ghana and have some of that Ghana jollof with you very soon.
We are waiting for you. I was in Nigeria a few days ago.
You didn't tell us.
You didn't tell us. You see?
That's not how we
I was
roll.
in Lagos a few days ago, and I didn't get to taste your jollof, but it's fine.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll bring some when we're coming. Thank you so much.